Well, welcome back to Inside Sports, talking Terps sports with local DC sports writer Patrick Stevens. Patrick, thanks for being here today.
Thanks again for having me.
Last week was signing day, big day for high school kids all across the nation, and University of Maryland. You know, no coach is going to say they did a bad job, but they did pretty good at keeping some local talent here in the program.
Certainly, you look at the fact that Maryland was able to. They'd already signed a guy like Dion Long, a DC guy who had gone to New Mexico and then on to a junior college. Tavon Jacobs was one of the three guys they were able to land in the last few days, last day basically, to kind of fill out this class. And so Randy Edsall was very happy with how things had gone, just by the fact that there seemed to be a little bit of an uptick for Maryland, and Maryland certainly did a whole lot in the area to try to improve its presence and to improve its kind of brand around here, and it seems like it's starting to pay off. Now, the reality is that, yes, Maryland might have done all this on signing day, but how quickly can these things really start to pay off on the field? Because that's ultimately where it matters, not so much in winning a headline in February.
Exactly, because everyone says, oh, we got this five-star recruit, we got this kid, we got that kid. Okay, how's this kid going to translate onto the field? And Maryland needs to start winning some games in the fall, even if who they get in the spring doesn't matter.
Yeah, and the phrase I like to use is there are people that would rather win on signing day than Saturday. And so I think that certainly, you know, when you look at what Maryland was able to do last year, frankly, they overachieved it. Even at 4-8, they overachieved, given their quarterback situation with C.J. Brown going down in the preseason. This is even before he started having more quarterback injuries with Hills and Rowe and Devin Burns. Last year was certainly another one of those foundational type years, as opposed to the first year under Randy Edsall back in 2011, when there were some expectations and they went 2-10. And so I think that for Maryland, I think it's important to see some progress, something closer to a postseason appearance, maybe get to 6 or 7 victories. I think the opportunity is there to do that, but it is going to take a few things, namely some sort of stability at quarterback, rebuilding a front seven on defense, and then the biggest question I think Maryland has heading into next year, who's going to play on the offensive line, and can they make this thing work for an offense that was ranked dead last nationally last year?
And quarterback was the problem, and you know they were going to lean on C.J. Brown before he got hurt. Will he be the starter heading into camp?
I think he's likely to do that. I mean, you look at the guys that they have. You know, Caleb Rowe, Perry Hills, both coming off ACL injuries, would not expect them to be participating in spring practice at all. And so they get a freshman coming in out of the recruiting class. So it wouldn't shock me to see them try to redshirt him at that point. And then you've got CJ coming back, a guy who was really in firm control of stuff until he went down in August. I would expect to see him be the most likely guy to emerge as a starter. They also have Ricardo Young, a DC guy by way of Virginia Tech and New Mexico, who hasn't taken a competitive snap since the fall of 2009 when he was in high school. And so that's a guy who's probably going to get a lot of work this spring, as CJ's not entirely back either. So overall, I would say C.J. Brown is the most likely starting quarterback come August 31st when they play Florida International. But there's certainly enough other guys around to make that far from a sure thing.
How important is it to get some of these guys work in the spring, in the fall, so a situation doesn't happen like it happened last year where you're down to a linebacker playing quarterback?
Well, last year was just so weird for them. You know, I think going into the season, everybody knew that they were at risk injury-wise of, you know, maybe you're going to be in a bad spot fast. And sure enough, you're starting true freshmen for the first 2/3 of the season and a linebacker for the last third. But at this stage, you have Hills and Rowe who have started games. You have C.J. Brown back, and you have a freshman that's come in. You've got Ricardo Young. You know, at this point, Sean Petty isn't the 5th quarterback; he's the 6th quarterback. So that's slight progress for Maryland at this stage. So I think that's something that for Maryland, I doubt they ever see a situation like that. You could probably play for 50 years and not see a situation like last fall. It was just truly bizarre, and I wouldn't expect quarterback issues to be that glaring at any point going forward.
So we'll shift from football to a sport that's being played right now, and we'll talk about lacrosse. 2 years in a row, the Maryland Terps make it to the final game. Still can't get over that hump to win a national championship. What do you expect out of them this year?
You know, I think it's a really interesting team in that everyone looks and says, hey, this team went to the national title game the last 2 years, and they bring back all but 4 guys that played in the Memorial Day loss to Loyola last year. They're going to be great. Well, everyone forgets that this was a team that was up and down for most of the season and just happened to get hot at the right time. I mean, they barely beat Lehigh in the opening round, and then just handled Johns Hopkins with incredible ease in the quarterfinals to get to the Final Four. And so overall, you almost have to look at it and say maybe these guys aren't necessarily the second best team in the land. I think they're going to be good. And I think that they have a lot of pieces in place. I think their defense will be solid. But I also wonder how consistent they're really going to be. That's something that they just haven't been over the last 2 years. And I'm sure that it's driven John Tillman mad as he's trying to get himself closer and closer. It just has to make him want to pull out his hair, the fact that they've been so up and down. So I would expect this to be a team that's somewhere around the top 5 for most of the season, maybe dips out of it a little bit. Certainly will pick up a couple victories along the way that make you think that they could be a real force in May. And there's probably going to be a game or two along the way where they do something that makes you wonder what happened here. So, and that's been their MO the last couple of years. And I would expect, until proven otherwise, that's going to be what these guys are like. But I would expect them to be maybe a little bit steadier this year than they were last.
Where's the scoring going to come from this year? I know in some games last year they had problems putting the ball in the net.
I think you're going to see a fair bit of scoring coming from the midfield. I mean, you look at some of the guys they've got. They got Jake Bernhardt back from injury. They've got John Hawes. They lose Drew Snyder in the midfield, but they bring back Kevin Cooper. Mike Chanenchuk's a guy who was never really healthy last year, dealing with some back issues. They expect him to be a lot better. And then on attack, you got Owen Bly as a guy that I think is really going to be a very crucial piece to this offense.
Defensively, what's it going to be like for them? I know that their goaltending situation is set, but around him, what's going on?
Well, the interesting thing is the biggest loss that they had on defense wasn't so much a player as it was switching coordinators. You know, Kevin Warren leaves, heads over to Georgetown, and so they picked up a new coordinator, and overall, you know, he has Nico Amato in the cage. He brings back Earhart and Cooper and Goran Murray on close defense, and they've got one of the best, if not the best, long pole in the country in Jesse Bernhardt. And so there's a lot of talent back there, and I would expect Maryland to be able, based not just on the talent, but also just their program MO of winning games in a very grinding fashion, just sort of beating people up a little bit. I mean, that's really what Maryland has done over the years. I mean, like it or not, that's the reputation. And I would expect those guys to really be able to keep teams in check quite a bit.
What's their schedule like? What can you see a game maybe like you were talking about earlier? This could be a hiccup game for them ahead of something else coming down the pipe.
You know, they've got some interesting games. Obviously, they have the stretch late in the season where they play Carolina, Virginia, Hopkins, Navy, then Hopkins. That's been the same every year since 1978. But I think an interesting addition, they play at Loyola in a rematch of the national title game later this month. And there's a couple other games along the way. You know, they've struggled over the years against UMBC for random reasons. Sometimes it's been because UMBC's been good. Sometimes it's been because Maryland just hasn't played very well. And so that game kind of stands out as one that could be a trouble spot. And they also play Stony Brook and Villanova, that are teams that maybe aren't necessarily great. I think Villanova's a little bit better than Stony Brook is. But those are both teams that could create headaches given the right day. So you know, obviously they play Duke in early March, as they do every year as well. So there's a lot of stuff there, you know, for Maryland to have to scale. And I would say that at the end of the schedule is a team that could create all sorts of problems for them, because they have the last few years, and that's Colgate. They've beaten them the last 2 years on the last weekend of the regular season, and that could happen again this year.
And it could be said that Colgate's cost Maryland a seed heading into the tournament.
I think you could very easily say that in both cases. I mean, I think in 2011, it would have been really hard to argue against Maryland being seeded, and it wound up costing them, losing at home to Colgate. Losing at Colgate last year, I think Maryland was already, you know, you could have made the case one way or the other, but that pretty much finished it off. So, you know, I think Maryland's made its life a lot harder for itself just because of those losses to Colgate the last couple of years. At the same time, they've gone on the road and won, and then won another quarterfinal and been on their way anyway. So it's certainly a game that shouldn't escape Maryland's notice once it's wrapped up with most of its regular season.
And we've been talking about Maryland, but we are in an area that's lacrosse rich. What other teams do they have to worry about? Who else is good nationally?
Well, I think you look at Loyola, the team that won the national title last year. They lose only 4 guys off of the not the dress list, but only 4 guys who played in the national championship game. Now, one of them was Eric Lusby, who just had a monster NCAA tournament, was the most outstanding player. But Loyola is going to be near the top of the heap no matter what. Johns Hopkins is a team that people would talk more about right now if they hadn't faded in the quarterfinals the last couple years. I mean, they've had some spectacular flameouts in the postseason, but the reality is that they've been really, really good for the most part, and they're a very veteran-oriented team. Duke's very good. Notre Dame's very good. Virginia lost a lot of talent from last year, but you know that they're loaded and you know that they're going to get better as the season goes along. Is this the year North Carolina can finally return to the Final Four after 20 years outside? It seems like, it doesn't seem that long ago that North Carolina was such a feared name in lacrosse, and they've certainly been very good, but to have not gotten to the Final Four in all that time is kind of mind-blowing, really. And so those are teams to keep an eye on. And then you look into some of the sleepers, or maybe not necessarily bigger names that we've seen get better and better over the last few years. Teams like Lehigh, Colgate, Denver, all going to be factors for sure. So there's no shortage of possibilities of teams that you could see make it to Memorial Day weekend in Philadelphia.
So what a team like Denver, touch on them real fast, because I know a lot of people in this area don't know them, but they are consistently making a tournament and they have a heck of a coach.
Certainly. I mean, they have Bill Tierney, who won 6 national titles at Princeton, and it did not take long for him to turn around Denver's fortunes and get them to be a much higher caliber type team. They're a team that gave Loyola its toughest test in the tournament last year in the quarterfinals over at Navy. And so I think that when you look at them, the way they play, very up-tempo, it's really impressive and fun to watch them play. And they're a team that maybe people forget about a little bit, but you know what? They came out and they beat Duke the other day in the opener for both teams. That was a really impressive result, and I would certainly expect Denver to be heard from by the time May rolls around.
Okay, Patrick, we are out of time for this edition of Inside Sports, all Terps, football, basketball, lacrosse. I want to thank Patrick Stevens for being my guest today, and we'll see you right here next time on Inside Sports. Have a great day.